we've obviously been doing like dumb vampire voices. I want to be very clear that despite the fact that the vampires in this film are like from Egypt or from France or from all over the world, they all genuinely do speak in that vampire voice. They've just like don't bother trying to think what an Egyptian would say. Just go, I want to drink your blood. You're listening to Diminished Returns, the podcast about sequels, prequels, spin-offs, and reboots. I'm Chris Scott, and across from me, he's not the Vampire Lestat, he's the podcaster Alan Johnson.
How do, pod people?
From an endless night, he will rise to seduce the world.
I am the Vampire Lestat.
In this, the second part of our Anne Rice Vampire Chronicles coverage, we follow on from Interview with the Vampire in last episode with a look at the sequel Queen of the Damned from 2002. Having had enormous financial success with the adaptation of the first book in a hugely popular series, following it up would seem obvious. Warner Brothers, however, seemed reluctant to do so. Anne Rice offered to adapt her second vampire novel for free, and they declined. It took almost a decade and the looming expiry date of the film's rights to actually revive production. The second film is based largely on the third book of the series, and where Interview with the Vampire was a highly theatrical, dark fantasy filled with grue, homoerotic subtext and incredibly famous movie stars, Queen of the Damned is a messy affair, replacing Tom Cruise with Stuart Townsend, best known for almost being Aragorn in Lord of the Rings, and R&B superstar Aaliyah as the titular queen. All of this soundtracked with the din of new metal. Loud enough to wake the dead, surely.
In his lust for mortal power, he will awaken an immortal evil that will turn the undead against each other in a war to possess our souls. Queen of the Damned.
We've got a lot to talk about here, right? And you, the listener, may not have watched this film. A choice which I can only commend, frankly. But I'm going to try and go through the plot of this film, okay? And there's going to be bits where you go, Chris, I feel like you've missed a step there because that doesn't make sense. And I guarantee you I have not missed a step. None of this makes sense in this film. So, Lestat wakes up, joins a new metal band. He says, I'm going to make all your dreams come true. Because evidently, vampires have an innate sense of how to navigate the stormy waters of the 2000s music industry, which was getting hampered by Napster, and fucking it was a really sort of weird time for things, but he's just immediately like, I'm going to make your dreams come true. We then cut to a giant press conference, right, in London.
Yeah, arbitrarily just in London, yes.
They've moved to London and are the biggest band on the planet without, it seems, ever having played a gig. But they're going to play a huge gig in LA at the, what's that place? Death Valley?
Death Valley, yeah.
Right, which to be fair, if you're a vampire, you would want to play somewhere called Death Valley. That's very on brand. Like, you're not going to play the Nokia Arena.
Well, a desert? It's super sunny the whole time.
Oh yeah, but he's playing at night. But you know, you're not going to play the
yeah,
fucking...
but he's got a sound check in 4 in the afternoon.
One of us was road crew in actual touring bands.
One of us has several issues with various aspects of the recording industry.
We'll get to that, because I assumed that this film was very accurate about being vampires and the life of a touring rock and roll band. So basically, this big huge press conference and the world's media there, right? The band is called the Vampire Lestat, and basically it's him and these new metal goons that he's found. Paparazzi are going mental and they've got this big press conference. Oh, the Vampire Lestat, the hottest band in the world right now, are going to be playing their first ever concert to like 200,000 people at Death Valley in LA. Why are we holding this press conference in London? But it doesn't matter. Anyway, and Lestat only appears on video. So it's like, ooh, mystery, right? And this press conference, you know, one reporter's like, but are you really a vampire? Which seems to suggest that in the space between him joining that first rehearsal and this press conference, not only have they become the biggest band in the world, but the world has also accepted that vampires are real and one of them is this guy in the band. Not as part of kind of Kiss style or Gwar style like shtick, like we're dressing up. The reality of this world in this film is that they have found that there's one real vampire. He's also said, by the way, there's other vampires, and they're not going to be happy with me being in a band, because there's two main rules about being vampires. Don't go out in the sun, don't form a band. So in this film, basically, in the time it's taken for the credits, the intro credits to roll,
the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari style music video to play.
Yeah, effectively, the whole world has just been like, a guy in a band says he's a vampire. Checks out. and everybody's just into it, right? So that happens. He stays in a mansion in Glastonbury for a couple of days. And there's a roadie guy, kind of manager guy, is bringing him women to kill. A kind of Peter Grant of Led Zeppelin, except less ferocious. Peter Grant actually probably killed people himself rather than bringing people for the band to kill. But anyway, he's got this big concert, Death Valley, and while that's happening, there's a lassie who has a dream sequence about when she's younger, and her aunt says you can't live with us because we're different, and you're like, ooh, what's happening there? Actually, no, you're like, I don't care about this, I don't know this character. But she actually is an apprentice at the Institute for Paranormal Studies, which means she's not time served, so she can't do Homers yet. But there's a group in London that is like stuffy Ghostbusters, but they don't bust ghosts, they just like record what happens with the black magic stuff. They're just like, oh, we just take photos. That's all they do. They're like a bunch of stuffed shirts. And she's like, ooh, there's a vampire. And you're like, yeah, he's world famous. But she's like, I'm going to investigate him. And they're like, but no, you're just an apprentice. And while we're waiting for the gig to happen, we have a flashback. And in the flashback, we find the guy that made Lestat. And the guy that made Lestat is called Marius. Mm-hmm. And he is like, oh, I'm going to make you a vampire. And then you're going to want to kill people and eat people. And he's like, okay, cool, but I also want to maybe fall in love and play the violin. And Marius is like, why have I made this the stupidest guy in the world? And then also, he also discovers a lair where there's a statue of Aaliyah, whatever, and she's the Queen of the Damned for some reason. Then, while that's happening, he meets the apprentice paranormal investigator. Her name is Jessie, and they have a bit of a like, oh, we kind of dig each other. So she then gets a ticket to go to LA to the gig, and then tries to make him turn into a vampire, but he refuses. Then they play the gig, but because he's told the vampires are real, other vampires want to kill him, so all these vampires are going to this gig to kill him, as well as 199,900 odd actual fans of terrible new metal vampire rock. And at this gig, Aaliyah stops being a statue and comes up and saves him from vampires, and then she wants him to be the king of the damned, right? Again, because I think she heard him play violin is the reason, and she's like, wow, violins are great. Nobody here has ever listened, like, get Spotify or fucking Apple Music, try some other stuff. You're all just falling in love with the first bit of music you hear. She's all like, you can be my king, and he's like, okay. And then we find out that the apprentice paranormal investigator, her aunt's a vampire. Except it's not her aunt, it's like her great granny who got turned into a vampire after she had children. Or was she pregnant, then got bit, gave birth to a human baby? I don't know. But she basically spends her time looking after her wains until they get to about 12.
Nothing she likes more than watching her descendants die off.
Yeah, and she's got like a little thing on her wall that marks all dead. It's Lena Olin, she's been in stuff. And then they get the paranormal woman and go, listen, I'm your aunt. And she's like, cool, I'm on your side then. And I guess they're all good vampires.
Yep.
And Marius is there as well. And so he's a good vampire, even though all the flashbacks and everything we've seen of him previously is that he's a bad vampire. But it's because there's a worse vampire, and that's the Queen of the Damned, Aaliyah. And Aaliyah and Lestat end up, she's like, let's just drink everybody's blood because we're vampires. And he's like, that's cool, you're hot, I dig it, you'll be my king. And then he goes and bites Jessie, the amateur apprentice paranormal woman. He bites her on the boob,
as you do.
Lestat's a tip man. And then at that point, I guess, because he drinks her blood, because in this film, if you drink somebody's blood, you get all their knowledge. He's like, oh, these are the good vampires. Does that mean I'm with the bad vampire? Yeah, she says she wants to kill the whole world and drink the planet. Yeah. It's pretty obvious, man. She's called the Queen of the Damned. She's not called, like, the Queen of good times. The Queen of Charity. She's called the Queen of the Damned. She's the baddie. And then Lestat's like, oh yeah? Well, I'll kill her. And he helps them kill her. That is the plot of the film. It's a classic boy meets girl Boy becomes international vampire music superstar. Girl, for some reason, really wants to fuck him and be turned into a vampire, even though there's no reason for this whatsoever in the film, and travels to a gig so that she can watch and be attacked by other vampires, and her family, who are also vampires, but she didn't know this, go, we're good vampires. And they have a fight.
Obviously, we're going to get into it. Like, the film is a mess. Like, it's all over the shop. But I think, in fairness to the director Michael Reimer, before we like tear this to shreds, I would like to say there's a certain good visual aesthetic to it. I just think it's really hamstrung by the fact that the plot is bonkers.
Okay, excellent. That's the one good thing about this film out of the way, right? So it's fucking bro. So, Interview with the Vampire, huge hit, kind of iconic thing, and so you think we're going to make a sequel. They wait, whatever this is, to put it in production, and it is, as you say, only because the rights are about to run out, and basically if they don't make a film, the rights will revert back to the author. The last thing you want to do is give any power to the writers. I agree, studios. Fuck those guys, right?
Seize the means of production.
Absolutely, right? So this is a film that 100% has the care and attention put into it that you would expect from a last-minute cash grab to stop the rights from going back. Holy shit. So, yeah, none of the returning cast. I know what you're thinking. Who needs movie stars for your movie? You don't want Brad Pitt. You don't want Tom Cruise. Who are these people? It's schmucks. Right, we'll get Stuart Townsend.
That guy was nearly Aragon.
That's one of these guys that was basically going to be huge, and it happens, and through probably no fault of his own. God bless him. In fact, I believe I was looking on Wikipedia, he now runs a garage in like Costa Rica or something.
Really?
Which I find actually quite endearing. Like, he was going to be the next big thing. It's not happened, and he's just going to fuck off and just like, I'll own a wee business and just relax. I respect that. What I'm saying is, Alan, is that you should retire from this podcast. It's what the people want. Let's fucking get into this, right? So, holy moly. In this Queen of the Damned, this film, Lestat, who was played by Tom Cruise, now played by Stuart Townsend. Lestat's just been kicking about in his fucking coffin for the last couple of 100 years until he's woken up by terrible gothy new metal getting played, I think, in his old house.
His old house, yeah.
Like, there's a band of sort of went, oh, there's this vacant old house, we'll set up and rehearse in here. And they play that sort of 2000s sort of slightly gothy, slightly emo new metal. It sounds fucking terrible. But it wakes him up, which that bit I'd be like, yeah, I can understand. Even a vampire who's lived for 200 years would be like, what is this shit? But no, he's like, oh, this sounds pretty good. And this is when you know he's been corrupted by evil because he thinks new metal is good. He basically rocks up. The start of this film is he wakes up from his crypt, rocks back up while this band's rehearsing. They all stop and go, what the fuck? And he's sort of lounging on top of an amp, right? He's already killed somebody, hasn't he, and stolen their leather. You know, it's a bit like the Terminator where he's like, I need your clothes, your shoes, and your motorbike. Except he just like bites this guy and takes his leather trousers, right? And he's lying on top of an amp, and they're like, what the fuck? And he's like, I'm a vampire. Wouldn't it be cool if I was your singer and we're going to be huge and famous? And they all go, yeah, that sounds pretty good. And at this point, I'm like, this film is going to be amazing. Because that's a fucking great idea. There must be other things where it's been like a vampire being a rock star. Because if it isn't, I'm writing that script and I will make it much more entertaining than this piece of shit. Because this film at the start is just like, yeah, he's a vampire, he's joining the band, and they're all like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And I'm like, holy shit, this film knows exactly what it's doing. It's like, yeah, it's going to be a vampire rock star. We just want to see fun stuff happen, don't we? And I'm like, this is going to be brilliant. And I was wrong.
Could have been like the Groovy Ghoulies, where Dracula, Wolfman and Frankenstein all have a band together.
My favourite cartoon as a child.
Like, it seems so weird. The end of Interview with a Vampire, Tom Cruise is in a red convertible driving out of San Francisco. What's to stop them just be like, let's pick the story up there, let's have Stuart Townsend in a red convertible being a record company executive, or...
Yeah, why has he been asleep? What's the point of him being asleep for 200 years?
And to suddenly be like, oh, this is the sound that's awakened me, like, nothing in the world has sparked my interest. So, since 1994, like, he's slept through the alt-rock movement, he's slept through the boy band era, he's slept through the dominance of hip-hop coming into the pop charts. Like, he missed the first Portishead album. Trip-hop's meant nothing to him. Like, what musical movement was he waiting for to, like, fall in his lap?
Terrible new metal.
Was it just the fact that no band had gone into his gaff to rehearse? Was that it?
Yeah, he's sitting there going, I really wish they'd make rock music, but just not quite as good. What if rock music had all the soul and groove taken out of it? That's what I'm looking for. And of course, most bands try to be good. So, that's why it's not worked out for him. But then new metal comes around and bands are like, what if Rage Against the Machine were terrible? Rage Against the Machine are like Karl Marx. I have a lot of time for Karl Marx, but almost everybody that's been influenced by him has been a sort of monster. And that's what Rage Against the Machine are in music. Like, Limp Bizkit are the Joseph Stalin to Karl Marx's Rage Against the Machine.
And then, like, Lestat, like the guy from your school that marries his first girlfriend, the first band he sees, he's just like, oh, this is my band now. This is me.
Yeah. It would have been funnier if he'd accidentally, like, the band that was rehearsing was Belle and Sebastian. And he's like, okay, look, I know you think it's probably not going to work, but imagine instead of you being a bunch of pale-faced Scottish indie guys, pale-faced rock god. Come on, guys. Okay, where do we start with this?
That flashback, that sort of middle part of the film, which takes up an enormous amount of time, that flashback to how Lestat became a vampire. It's like Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise have flipped roles there.
Yeah.
Because we've got Vincent Perez.
No, you're right.
Vincent Perez is like Tom Cruise, teaching the sort of like young vampire the tricks of being a vampire.
Yeah, because in Interview with the Vampire, Lestat is basically the old hand teaching Louis, and Louis like, no, I still love people, and Lestat's like, no, let's just kill people. And now, you're right, it's flipped, that Lestat is like the kind of lovelorn, that amateur paranormal investigator woman with the, let's be honest, quite cracking tits. There's something about her and it's like, okay, we get it, you like boobs. No, but that doesn't make you interesting, pal. Everybody likes boobs. It's like pizza, right? Boobs are like pizza. Everybody loves them.
Even when they're bad, they're still kind of good.
Yeah, and, Italians do them best. The point is, right, you're right. So Lestat was this like pure badass evil fiend in the last film.
Yeah.
And in this film, he's this like kind of emo lovelorn guy. But again, I think they have the same problem in this film they did in Interview with the Vampire, is that I guess you're meant to be sympathetic towards Lestat, even though we've seen him murder young women who are groupies at the start of this film. But yet we're meant to think he's quite soulful because he played the violin once.
The violin's the one thing he carries with him through his life.
Basically he kills like a woman who's playing the violin on the beach and then keeps her fiddle because he's like, it was so tough. You killed that woman. You fucking murdered the woman who's just on the beach.
And her father ended up being killed by Marius, because it's really important that vampires stay hidden in this movie. Vampires have to stay hidden. And then so when Lestat is at the press conference and says, like, to all the other vampires out there, they know where to find me, come and get me or whatever.
Which again suggests that this could have been a really cool vampire John Wick 3, where there's millions of vampires trying to kill this other vampire. That would be a cool film. This is not a cool film. It's another great opportunity that falls in the laps of the screenwriter here, and they just immediately launch it in a rose ed instead of putting it into the top corner. This film is just like riddled with just like terrible choices, right? They have this like paranormal investigative unit, so this should be like the main protagonists trying to figure out what's happening.
Yeah, the secret society out to try and debunk or destroy vampires.
That's kind of cool and interesting. But you get one scene of them in a nondescript boardroom, and then that lassie is basically just like, Stuart Townsend looks pretty good in leather pants. I think I'd like to fuck that vampire. And to be fair, he does look pretty good in leather pants. Fair play. He's a good-looking young boy.
It's pretty amazing. Like,
when you see a lot of these sort of vampire things, I think, there is this idea that, okay, there is something alluring about it. And so you maybe will have like a female character and being kind of like, he's dangerous, but he's been alone for so long. And okay, it's a bit hokey, but you can kind of like, they put the work in to at least give it a go. But in this film, she literally just sees him on the telly and goes, but I bump him. That's it. And then she's like, she figures out that in what he references in one of his lyrics, that there's a vampire bar in London where vampires go to, right? And so there's a scene where she rocks up to this vampire bar. Here's the thing. Why are all vampires in every film ever, always into like goth industrial music? Every single time, it's always this sort of like goth industrial music. I just want to walk into a vampire club and it's like somebody doing a Cat Stevens song in the corner. It's Acoustic Wednesdays, for vampires. And they're wearing a cardigan. Maybe a turtleneck. I don't know if that'd be a problem for a vampire. But no, it's basically, it walks in and it's like every other vampire bar in every other film you've ever seen.
What about the Blood Ravers and Blade?
Yeah, but that was kind of like industrial rave. It's a similar vibe.
Knitwear's important to you for vampires?
I just feel sorry for like the hipster vampires who would like to listen to some Kraftwerk. What about a Northern Soul vampire? get a best of Wigan playlist and do some cool dance moves, and they'd probably be brilliant at dancing because vampires can run up walls and shit. They'd love that stuff in Northern Soul. But no, every time he goes there, it's all just like Marilyn Manson and fucking shit like that. Sympathy for the vampires with good music taste. You know, there's a scene with these vampires in this bar, and it's so cliched, it's so lame, right? But then Lestat turns up and goes to save her, this woman he's never met, from these vampires, because they are totally in each other for a reason never explained in the film.
What piques his interest in her is that she has learned the name Marius from her boss, Brian, and so she drops that name, Marius, when she's at the Vampire Club.
Marius is quite a popular name in Poland, I think. Basically, she says Marius, and he's immediately like, oh, that'll be the same Marius that I knew 200 years ago. It could have just been like Marius, the new guy who, back in those days, we had open borders with the EU because we weren't an isolationist country. Marius is just a normal working vampire from Poland who's just coming over here to make some money to send back to his family. Okay, so far this film hasn't been as enjoyably crazy as I thought it was going to be when it was telling me it was about a vampire rock star, and it's just been a lot of boring, dull shit. But finally, we're going to get to see him fight some vampires.
Yes.
He basically saves her from these vampires. There's like 3 or 4 vampires and one Lestat, but he's like this old fucking guy who's been doing this for ages, so some cool shit's going to happen. Oh, what's that? They've tried to film it in a way that means you can barely see anything happen, and then when you do see vampires fight, you know vampires can move dead fast? Well, the way they show this in the film is by slowing it right down and making it look very blurry. It is the worst effect I've ever seen in a film. It looks like the $6 Million Man, except not as good.
The weird sort of motion blur on the action sequences is really awful, but not as awful as the drum kit that the vampire band are playing in the Admiral's Arms, the vampire pub. They've got a drum kit that's just all bongos and congos. Like, no snare drum, no kick drum.
It's basically the vampire percussion section from Kid Creole and the Coconuts. I tell you, that vampire band must be raging, because they seem to have been on the scene for ages. You know, this newcomer's just rocked up and fucking suddenly he's playing like proper gigs. So here's what I was going to say, right? So the whole thing is basically he's in a band, right? Which is, again, it's such a great fun idea that they do nothing with.
The scriptwriters should have just pulled everything from one novel instead of trying to pull 2 books and only like really random and weird parts from those 2 books. Let's actually have the story of the movie be him taking over the world as a rock star.
That's a much more entertaining. Basically, he joins this band and immediately become the biggest band in the world. I want to see him like play toilet gigs. I want him to, you know, have to like turn up at a shitty venue and be like, I will not do a gig that is paid to play. You know?
Do you really think Lestat's the kind of guy that's going to be helping shuffle the amps up the stairs? No way.
Aye, 100%. You know, and that's the other thing, like, when they get a record deal, like, I want to see him in negotiations with his manager, and his manager's like, these people are trying to screw us out of fucking, you know, distribution rights and stuff like that, you know, you'll only get the rights back to your music in 60 years, and he's like, that's alright. I'm a vampire, it's fucking fine, yeah. That's like a couple of weeks to me, I can give a fuck, you know. You know, let them have the masters for 20 years, I don't care.
What is time to an immortal?
Yeah. Like, we've booked you a gig. You know, where is it? It's on this morning with, and he's like, I can't, I'm sorry guys, I just can't do it. You know, I keep forgetting you're a fucking vampire.
I'm only available for Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, I could, yeah. Now, Alan, the listener may or may not be aware, but you actually did work in rock and roll for how many years?
20 years. I formerly did find food for vampires. That was my main source of income.
Well, I was going to say, so you were a part of touring crews for, you know, multiple indie bands from Scotland on world tours.
Yes.
And that's somebody in the music industry. Vampires are probably not the worst person you've met, I imagine.
No, not by a long shot. I mean, there's certainly other kind of bloodsuckers in the music industry, but
nice.
not out and out vampires.
So how realistic was this as a portrayal of being in a band and playing a big gig? Because you've played, I assume, Glastonbury and big arena gigs.
I mean, in terms of what I've seen in my professional experience versus what's going on in this movie, there were points when I was just like pulling my hair out. I mean, first of all, the band don't even look like they ever fucking practice. Like, it's like very low on the scale, but when are they actually practicing? I would like to have seen a movie where they're in the studio just like laying down the tracks. I would maybe even have liked them to bring in like some stuff about like, you know, backwards masking on the record that is like magical stuff, hypnotising people. I mean, that's the other thing is that it's really funny is that immediately when he starts singing, it sounds terrible. Like when Lestat joins them in that rehearsal and he starts singing. I was just like,
It'd be hilarious if the band characters went, oh, actually, mate, nah, you're alright. You're a bit pitchy, you know. I mean, I don't know if autotune could really fucking... Yeah. And that's the other thing, if you're a producer, like, how do you fucking produce a fucking 200-year-old vampire? Be like, listen, man, I'm not entirely sure you're really hitting that note, and the next thing you know, he's fucking snapped your neck and drank your fucking blood. Yeah.
Yeah, and the guy's so like self-assured that he's just like amazing, and you're like,
yeah, his mic technique wee bit over the fucking place as well.
That was the thing. I listened to a podcast the other day about a guy that had been in prison for 24 years and then was released when it was discovered that he was innocent, and he was talking about like just how confusing like weird parts of the world were, that in the 20 years that he'd been in prison that he'd just missed these things like toilets that automatically flush, or iced coffee, just like weird wee things that we just take for granted, and yet we're meant to like understand that Lestat knows how to double track a vocal, or what a microphone does. Like, does he know like when he's on axis?
Well, this feedback, what beautiful sound it makes.
Exactly. I could go on about the various little nuances that like really bother me about it, but the one thing that fucking I hated is when Lestat obviously invents Coachella and has the Mad Max Glastonbury in the middle of the desert, and they've got their stage. It didn't look like there was any PA hung. So like, there's
going to be loads of like 100,000 people at the back going, what? What did he? They should have bigger speakers.
Exactly. There was no delay towers for a crowd of 200,000 people. Also, it just looked like the access road actually drove through the middle of the site, so people were just driving their cars into the audience.
It's a health and safety nightmare.
Totally. And I also didn't like the fact, because I know from personal experience, there was no way that the band would actually want security personnel on the stage in full view of the audience, just standing about like a fucking spare prick.
I thought maybe they were like, you know how Public Enemy had the SW ones, all dressed in the berries and stuff with the Uzis. Maybe that was their version of that. It did seem. Like, who was taking tickets for that gig? There didn't seem any fencing.
They were selling merch at the press conference, but apparently there was no merch sold at the gig. I mean, the logistics of how these things,
the logistics and the financial implications here, right? I imagine there's just a bit where Lestat is like, oh, I have made investments from 200 years ago, I am rich. And the rest of the band are like, what about us? And he's like, oh, you understand that everything we have been doing has been paid for by the record company, and actually that advance is an advance on sales, and we have not made enough money back for you to get your proper share. Ha 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 ha. That is how the music industry died in the 90s. Ha 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 ha.
So, World Tour Lestat, how many gigs are we going to do? One concert. Just like, come on, mate. How many? 200,000 tickets. Okay, so let's say like $30 a ticket, 200,000 tickets, right? Plus we've got to take away like production costs on that. Like,
no, but he's like, don't worry, we're saving because we're not going to have a PA or a fence. Yeah, it's like, maybe that's what they've sat there the day before and went, shit, we're not going to make any money if we actually fucking pay that PA company. And they went, sorry, pal. You know.
Don't know if you noticed. So Jonathan Davis from Korn. Sorry, I mispronounced that. From Korn. The first time I just didn't say the backward R properly.
Come on.
So Jonathan Davis from Korn, he's a guy that wrote the sort of like the music for the band. So all that like terrible new metal that appears throughout the movie is written by the guy from Korn. But he pops up as a ticket tout when Jessie, the paranormal girl, gets to LA.
If somebody offered me a cameo in that film, I'd go, I'm alright. I never want to be in films if this is the film I get to be. Do you know what I mean? You might as well be in fucking Birth of a Nation. You know, it's that disgraceful. So listen, Korn are a band who I have heard and also sound terrible, so that's good. I know many people like them, and I'm sure they're very talented men, but they are a good choice for dog shit new metal. Well done producing the film. If that's what you were aiming for, you did pick the right fucking guys.
But, like, obviously the book is set in the 80s, and Lestat sort of like, you know, emerges in this like 80s rock scene.
Which makes more sense.
My question to you is, which like youth movement do you think that Lestat should really have been part of?
Well, I definitely think like 80s hair metal, or even like kind of 70s kind of arena rock, because see when this film started and before I realised that it was going to go down the full new metal and not be interesting at all route, I genuinely thought, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. They're going to just have bands like Led Zeppelin and Fleetwood Mac, and then even into the 80s when you get like Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue, that these people led vampiric existences. They were living at night time. They were effectively degenerates, addicted to various things. Holy shit, if only there was some sort of like fictional horror archetype you could totally just plop into that sort of scenario and it would make loads of sense. And of course, like the narcissism and the selfishness of rock stars lends itself to the vampire, and their killing and sucking of young blood is obviously, you've got this whole thing about how groupies and women and fans are treated by people in bands. All of that would be amazing, and I think definitely like kind of like Led Zeppelin style, particularly when you get Jimmy Page and that kind of cult, cult, all that would have been such a good idea. Or 80s hair metal, again, excess. They're all drug addicts. They're all drinking. Half of them wouldn't even notice if there was a vampire in their midst. All that would be such fun. And this film does nothing with it. All the fun stuff doesn't happen, and he basically just is like, "Oh, I'm the biggest rock star in the world. You didn't get to see this happen." The interesting thing would be people's reactions to somebody saying they're a vampire and then them proving it. All that stuff, you're like, I would like to see that. And they just skip over that going, it's like if you're talking to somebody in a pub and they're like, and then of course, I had that wild night and police got involved and I was in the papers, but you don't want to hear about that. So I had steak pie for tea. And you're like, no, what? Back the fuck up, man! I don't want to hear about your fucking steak pie. Tell me about the fun stuff. And this film is just like went past all the fun stuff. These sort of rock and roll heroes mostly are degenerates, and so it works. Give me that story, because that's what they're doing. They're basically saying this band is as big as like Led Zeppelin in the States at their peak, or Guns N' Roses at their peak. That could play a like Nebworth style fucking huge gig somewhere and it would sell out, and the world is interested in them because they seem like these otherworldly fucking figures. But you make it in the 2000s and it's the internet era, and it's like nobody has any sense of wonder at the singer from Papa Roach. He's just a fat guy in shorts. Now listen, I'm a fat guy. I wouldn't wear shorts on stage because I'm a fucking professional. But, like, they picked the exact wrong era to do it. And, anything after the sort of 2000s, rock stars aren't these, distant, weird figures anymore. They've got Instagram, they've got fucking Twitter. I know it's like 2004 or whatever, but they still would have been, it's the internet era. It's, these dumb suburban kids who are basically making this, and if you like this music, I know I'm slagging off, right, and that's fine, like, we can all like different music, but that doesn't lend itself well to a story about a rock god, because when you look at Fred Durst, you don't think rock god, you think sad divorced dad. And he's looked like that since he was about 25.
This movie's only relevant as long as that fad is relevant. Whereas if you just like kind of wound the clock back 10 years or 20 years, you give the movie a better shot at longevity because you create this weird alternate timeline, and also you get to tell a better story.
We call them rock gods because there was a time when they were like gods amongst men. And that time was 20 years before this film was fucking made. At a minimum. Right? So it's like, you might as well make a film about a vampire who becomes a coal miner now. It's like, you've missed the boat. It's about a vampire who gets a job in print. It's like, I hate to break it to you guys. You fucked it. It's too late. You gotta make it a period piece. Honestly, please somebody tell me if there's been another film about a vampire or like something cool like a comic about a vampire being a rock star, because there should be a cool version of this made somewhere.
There is a bunch of horror movies about like kind of rock bands that are either from the dead or demonic spirits. There's none that I can remember that are like specifically vampires.
I'm writing it Sony, Warner Brothers, Legendary. I want you all to just start bidding on this right now. I promise. R rating, you're going to see at least 7 to 8 boobs. Non-negotiable on any film that I write. That's my two choices. I never go in between. It's wild. This film is so badly made, and you can tell that they're like, oh, this is shit, because this film has 3 different voiceovers in it. That's when you know that this film is fucked, right? Is that it starts with Lestat doing a narration. Oh, by the way, Lestat obviously is from France. So his name means the statistician.
But that's also why his journal that he's kept begins, Je suis le Vampire Lestat.
Brilliant. Oh yeah, the voiceover, right? So there's Lestat wakes up at the start of the film and starts narrating what's happening. Oh, I was asleep for 200 years, and now I hear about this, blah, blah, right? And then we cut to Jesse, the paranormal apprentice, And she immediately gets a voiceover being like, whenever I was a child, I always wondered if I was different. And you're like, wait, we're getting 2 fucking narrations? And then at one point, Jesse reads Lestat's diary, which then starts a third voiceover, which is not Lestat's narration, but his words from the page translated into English as she's reading it. So she's reading it, but it's coming over in the film in Lestat's voice. That's 3 separate bits of narration. This film is fucking dog shit. If you've got one narrator, that's tough. 3, get to fuck.
Absolutely.
And they don't change. It's not like, oh, this is this person's point of view. No, they keep just like, whenever there's a bit they need to explain in the plot or what's happening, it just cuts to a different narration. And then there's giant swathes where there's no narration. Fucking pick a lane.
And there's also a point where there's a flashback and then a flashback inside that flashback.
It's a double flashback. It's like Memento if Memento was dumb.
What I wanted to say is that this movie has been totally straight-washed. There's no hint of that like homoeroticism between Marius and Lestat. There's no hint that there's any of the kind of Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise homoeroticism going on there.
Yeah, it's quite weird that a film from 1994
yes
can be, you know, more kind of progressive, if you want to say that, than a film from 2004. But it's basically like, remember the kind of super gay Lestat that you loved from the first film? Well, what if he now fucks chicks? Like, he literally bites on a boob, as I've mentioned. Yeah, you know, he's a real man's man vampire. He's not one of these European fancy Dan vampires. He'll drink a 6-pack with you, man. He'll watch the game, you know. And that's the thing, is like, effectively, he's meant to fall in love with the paranormal investigator, and then the main character, the Queen of the Damned, comes into the picture, and he immediately just fucking fucks Jesse off.
Yeah.
And is like, I'm going with the pop star Aaliyah. And then literally 15 minutes later, he decides, nah, fuck it, I actually really love that chick Jessie again, and fucks off the Queen of the Damned. The Queen of the Damned, the name of this whole fucking film is The Queen of the Damned, and she's in it for maybe 20 minutes, and really doesn't do much. She sets some people on fire, which was like, obviously, I would say 20% of the budget, because they obviously left nothing for fucking any other actual fight scenes. But she really just kind of stoats around, eventually gate crashes the gig, and stops this gig like about halfway through the fucking gig, and then they leave, and then nobody ever seems to be like, I would like to have seen like the reviews in Rolling Stone where it was like, the gig started off okay, but then all these vampires started attacking this dude, and then this chick just appeared and set them all on fire, and I was like, this light show's amazing, but then it finished, the gig was only like 40 minutes. You know, can at least came on and played Louie or something, or, you know, did a couple of covers
like
for an encore.
If the band was still like chugging away, like playing their like leaden new metal while the vampire battle was going on, it might have been kind of fun, but they play a bit of one song, it stops abruptly when vampires start to try and get on stage and stab Lestat.
The crowd just sit and watch it like, okay, like, I wonder what's happening here. My favourite bit about the gig scene, that Jessie, our apprentice paranormal woman, she goes to this gig, and her boss follows her, right? Realises she's going to this gig and follows her, and immediately runs into her in a crowd of 200,000 people, which is brilliant. Like, you know, right? He's like, look, I've come here to stop you. And she, like, if I was her, I'd be like, fucking well done for finding me, man. This is like a huge, big fucking place.
Have you ever gone for a piss at the Barrowlands and try to get back to your pal that's got your pipe?
You're fucked. But then at this gig, she's still in love with Lestat, and she's like, I really want to get close to Lestat. And she sees these vampires go and attack him, and she starts shouting while she's about 10 rows from the front at a gig with 200,000 people. While the band is playing, she shouts, Lestat! Lestat! to warn him at a gig where everybody's already chanting Lestat, and where she is probably about 100 yards from him, and he's got a massive PA behind him. How stupid. Like, how did you get to be an apprentice at this paranormal investigations thing? They can't have had a lot of other candidates, because you've tried to get somebody's attention in a rock and roll show by shouting the name of the band. What else are you going to do to warn them? Shout encore? One more song. And so she's at this gig, and she's trying to warn him for some reason. But also while that's happening, her family come to get her. What I like about this is her family are effectively like a black magic village people.
Yeah.
Five different looking vampires who stand there and are trying to save her from, we're not entirely sure, neither is the film.
What's even more confusing is that some of those like vampire village people are characters from Interview with a Vampire, but completely recast.
Okay.
Because obviously those characters exist within the Vampire Chronicles.
Yeah. why wouldn't people want to come back to work in the masterpiece that's Queen of the Damned?
So the blonde-haired vampire that looks like he could have been playing like second backup guitar in Def Leppard is played by a guy called Matthew Newton, who's a fucking scumbag. But he's meant to be the Antonio Banderas role, and you couldn't get someone who's less like...
More different looking, yeah.
Now, I know that's more in line with the book, but yeah, it's even weirder that you've got no attempt to try and link the film in any way.
Aye, there's no rhyme or reason. And so Aaliyah appears at this gig and saves Lestat from these vampires, and she's just like, you're going to be my king. And he's like, well, that sounds pretty cool, man.
Yeah.
Fucking hot piece of business.
They have sex in a bath filled with rose petals, and he turns into a daywalker because of her magical vagina.
That's right, because when he drinks her blood, I believe, rather than when he eats her puss. I mean, unless you saw a director's cut that I would much rather have seen.
What I like about though, like he drinks her blood for the second time, like that gives him this like rejuvenated power. He can now walk in the sunshine. Suddenly, like she's just killing everybody. Like she obviously has been asleep for hundreds of years, so she just starts like drinking everybody dry. I
think they're on like a private island or something, and she just like kills the entire island.
Yeah, the whole island is just like covered in corpses that have just been drunk dry by Aaliyah. And, you know, if the release of WAP this year has taught us anything, that the real enemy is just a sex-positive black woman. So at that point, Lestat just decides that, oh, actually, Queen of the Damned, you're the bad one. I'm all down for being a vampire, but don't just go, like, killing everybody in the island.
Like, there's just hundreds of bodies strewn everywhere, which is actually quite a cool image, right? And she's just standing there like, yeah, you know, we're just going to kill everybody. And he's a bit disgusted by it. And she's like, oh, you're still maybe being a bit mortal there. Don't worry about it. You know, we're gods. We're going to kill everyone. And he's like, this is not cool, killing all these people. Hold on. This entire film, he's been killing innocent young women. And at one point, he kills a woman in the park just to make a point to Jesse. Just to make a snide little point about how being a vampire isn't that fun. He kills a woman. And now he's like, whoa. Hey, you killed like 100 people in one night. I mean, you could kill 2 or 3. I'm not a monster. But once you start heading into the hundreds, then that's where I, Lestat, the person that you have seen in this film alone, kill about 8 to 10 people. That's where I draw a line. It's like, why would he fucking care? It's so fucking dumb.
Well, you know, let's talk about Aaliyah in this movie. You know, her life tragically cut short in the August of 2001, and this film comes out in February 2002, and it's dedicated to her memory. Yeah. You know, that's the lasting legacy that, you know.
If you really wanted to show respect, take her name off the credits. Just be like, we know you wouldn't want this to be your last fucking artistic thing that you've done. Yeah, I mean, it's a real shame because she's not good in this film because she's got nothing to do.
Well,
she's not bad either, but it's just like she basically just walks around looking hot. So does Stuart Townsend. I mean, that's effectively their characters wear very little and look hot, and they both are hot. So fair play. Other than that, there's no real fucking character work done. So she just kind of walks about going, we can drink blood, and Stuart Townsend's like, that sounds good. And it's like, cool, you're evidently Italian vampires from my impersonation. You know, like she's got nothing to do other than just kind of walk around and like point at things that go on fire. And, you know, I mean, I can't remember, is it Romeo Must Die? Was it that film?
Romeo Must Die with Jet Li.
Is she good in that? I can't remember that.
Yeah, she's really good in that.
Would you rather be in a plane crash or watch this film again?
I mean, I'd rather watch this film again. I'm no Vampire Lestat.
I'm not in the bubble. By the way, what will be hilarious is if I ever do die in a plane crash, and then you can clip this in the tribute show.
Choice was in front of him, and he stuck with his decision.
Yeah. So basically, there's the good vampires, which is Marius, who was a bad vampire throughout this whole film, but is now in the good vampires. You've got Lena Olin and these bunch of other people. They're all the good vampires. They team up with Lestat to defeat the Queen of the Damned because he's drank magical boob blood from Jesse, the paranormal investigator. So basically, he's drank from Jesse's boob, killing her.
Yes.
Right? So she's dead, and then because he's drank her blood, he's like, these are the good vampires for some reason. And then they all kill the Queen of the Damned. Lestat's like, well, I guess I'm going to have to make Jesse a vampire, which she wanted about an hour ago in the film. And he makes her into a vampire, and they all live happily ever after. You know, so they've defeated the Queen of the Damned.
Yes, because all of the good vampires, who I think their motivation for being good is purely to protect the mystery theory of vampires. They want to try and put the genie back in the bottle. The Queen of the Damned dies and Lena Olin becomes the statue and she's the new Queen of the Vampires.
This film then ends, basically Lestat and Jessie, she's now a vampire, and despite the fact they've only spoke about 4 sentences to each other, they're like, we're together, we're in love, everything's going to work out great.
Because Lestat's super straight now, let's be clear, no gay here.
She's quite an attractive woman, but if she realised that his last fucking person he was hanging about was Brad Pitt, she'd feel a bit insecure. I mean, it's like, oh, Jesus, right? So, this film ends on a scene which is so dumb, is that they go back to the paranormal offices and they find her boss back at the office.
He's reading 2 newspapers. One, the front page said, drugs and water, and the other headline is, band carries on.
Yeah, band carries on without Lestat. So let's be clear, right? The band called Lestat the Vampire are carrying on without Lestat the Vampire. That's worse than the Lost Prophets trying to carry on. You know what I mean? You've just got to accept it. The guy's name's in the fucking band.
But there's certain things you can't come back from.
Aye, speaking of monsters. But they rock up, Jessie and Lestat, and are like, he's like, here's my diary back, because they stole his diary, the diary that was in the offices. Jessie offers him, like, do you want to be a vampire? And so she's just like, you've just been a vampire for like 2 nights, and she's like, you want to be one? It's pretty cool. Right? And he's like, no, I don't want to be one. And you're like, oh, okay, right. But in this film, it's like a guy I've only seen twice and has no character in this film whatsoever. We make a big point of going back to his office to go, do you want to be one? And he goes, no. And you go, oh, that's got that hammed. And they walk out, and then 2 seconds later, Marius, the guy that turned Lestat, turns up to the office. Oh, he's going to go in there and turn him into a vampire. As if that's like a cool ending, like that's the equivalent of Tom Cruise turning up at the end of Interview with the Vampire.
Yeah.
We don't know who this guy is. We don't care. He also doesn't want to be a vampire. So, and also, you were the good guys 10 minutes ago, and now you're turning up like a bad guy to kill this guy.
Yeah.
What, Alan? What? Like you didn't need to have this scene. You could have just finished it with the incomprehensible battle.
There's numerous scenes that we didn't need to have.
I mean, all of it.
Somewhere in between the opening credits and the closing credits.
You could have ended it at the incomprehensible battle at the stadium, the incomprehensible battle in the lair of the good vampires. But instead you've ended it with an incomprehensible fucking character moment based around a character who has 3 lines in the fucking film.
Yeah.
This is so fucking dumb. Queen of the Damned, it's up to the most incompetent film I've ever seen.
It's so weird how muddled it is.
This is definitely up there.
Did you read about that weird story about the guy from like West Lothian that murdered his friend? He claimed that Akasha, which is the name of the character that Aaliyah plays in the movie,
the titular Queen of the Damned,
had claimed that she'd come to visit him and then said that if he took a life, if he murdered someone, then he would be given immortality and this new life. The article I read about it didn't specify whether he had watched the film 100 times or whether he was just like fantasizing about that character from the film speaking to him.
Here's what I would take from this, right? See, if I was going to fucking murder someone, I'd be doing it inspired by at least like a good film, like a Coen Brothers film or a fucking Scorsese film. You know what? I'm a film hipster. See, I make this solemn promise to you, the dear listener of the Diminished Returns podcast. When I eventually go crazy and murder someone in cold blood, I will make sure that I am inspired by the films of Akira Kurosawa. Dark gift comes differently to everyone. You're like, oh, so it can just be plot dependent? Cool, okay.
I wanna be
Jesse's boy. How can I find a vampire like that?